Hello, hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nonprofit Enthusiast Live. I'm your host, Lasheena Williams, and so excited to be back with you all as we continue the conversation on measurement and evaluation for nonprofit organizations. Today, I have Dana Litwin back with us on Nonprofit Enthusiast Live, and I'm so excited to jump into the conversation. Hello,
Hey, Lasheena. Hey, good to see you again.
same
Thanks for
here.
having me back. It's good to be back.
Yes, welcome back. Um, for those that may not have got to meet you in previous lives, do you mind sharing a little bit about your nonprofit journey and where you are today?
Sure. Well, I do consulting primarily focused on strategic volunteer engagement, but I also have clients when right now we're doing AmeriCorps planning grant. So, really anything to do with volunteering, community service, nonprofit program design, evaluation. I do a lot of live streams and webinars for different organizations and clients. Just talked to Colorado Parks and Wildlife yesterday in a webinar. So, yeah, anything really to do with volunteer engagement, how we can measure it with real metrics, metrics that matter, and just, people are people. How do you engage people and get them to want to do the work with you and align with your mission? And that's kind of what I'm all about. I've been in this business for 20 something years. Started with as, entry level volunteer coordinator with Project Open Hand, where I'm beaming in from San Francisco years ago for a few years, and I primarily worked with conservation organizations. I worked for the San Francisco Zoo for a while with their docent volunteer program, and I've been consulting. Started part-time consulting in 2006, but I've been full-time consulting and supporting myself with it since 2019. So we didn't know what the world was going to do the next year, but I was already online and working for myself, so it kind of worked out that way. But yeah, I'm glad to be back, and we've talked about a few cool subjects related to volunteer engagement, and I just happened to do a webinar for a client on key performance indicators for volunteers. So again, I think the stars have aligned with some good synchronicity for us in the topic this month.
Perfect. Yes. So let's jump right into the topic. What tips do you have for nonprofit organizations when it comes to measurement and evaluation for their volunteer programs?
Well, hopefully they've got some good software to help, unless someone really wants to do the math on their own, and that's fine. Sometimes you can find a volunteer who's a great math graduate student who can do the analysis for you. But if you have any kind of volunteer management database software, there's all different kinds of brands out there, then that can at least help you start to sort what you're measuring and what's important to measure. And I think there's a really common misunderstanding in nonprofits that the number of volunteers and the hours that they serve is, that's been such a stereotypical standard measure that we do that I think a lot of organizations just stop there. And they think as long as we're measuring the number of volunteers we have and the number of hours that they're doing and how many people are in each shift or each program or how many shifts filled in, then that's all we need to measure. And that's just the beginning. That's what we would call guardrail metrics. So, guardrail metrics, as opposed to key performance indicators that are ideally tied into the strategic plan or at least main goals and milestones for your agency, those are two completely different things. So, in the webinar I just did for Visas Voices, and there's a free recording of it that's coming up, so we can link to that. But if you just look up Visas Voices, Visas One, you'll find a resource page that has the free webinar in that for folks to watch after this. But the gist of that is that if you're only measuring how many people, how many hours, you're not getting the real picture of impact that volunteers have strategically with your organization. And because volunteers are probably most likely to be the most headcount of any department is probably going to be volunteer services. And I know, HR and operations and finance may not look at it the same way, but that's really the truth of it is these are still people that are working for your organization, even if they're not being paid, even if they're very part-time or they drop in a few times a year for important events. They're still members of the team, and their impact matters. And you can communicate to leadership or the board or whoever you funders, founders, whoever you want to listen, foundations, grant applications. It's better to have much more data on the real impact of volunteers than to just say we have 100 people and they did 1,000 hours. Like,
Mhm.
numbers numb. Nobody really cares if you're just spewing numbers at them. There's no context to those numbers. Like, well, what does that mean for, kids whose literacy got better, if that's part of your program? What does that mean for kittens and puppies adopted in a quarter, if you're in animal welfare? Or how many people called up your crisis line, your warm line for parental support? Like, whatever your mission is, and if you're utilizing volunteers with your organization, that is a crucial strategic pillar of your organization, is to invest time and money into volunteer services. Hopefully hire someone with a CNP or a CVA who really knows their stuff to run the program at a manager or director level. But the guardrail metrics are just the start. So number of people, number of hours, that's the beginning. If
Mhm.
someone is in a hospital, you might have a key performance indicator be something like, we want to tie volunteer performance and patient experience together, because
Mhm.
hospitals get money for patient experience and social determinants of health. So ideally, you have a business objective that you can easily define, doesn't have to be complicated, that the rest of the agency recognizes as one of their business objectives.
Mhm.
And typically that's, has an action verb in it, like we want better coverage of volunteers visiting patients per round for companion checks, health checks, playing cards, whatever it is. But that ties into a business objective of the patient experience. So we want to increase a key performance indicator sentence for a hospital might be something like, we want to increase volunteers on patient visits per shift from 2 per shift to 5 per shift
Mhm.
by the second quarter of the year. So a SMART goal, or a smarter goal, we've hopefully all heard SMART goals before, tie
Mhm.
into key KPIs, key performance indicators for volunteers as well. So it's specific, it's measurable, it's attainable, it's realistic, it's relevant, and it's time bound. So that sentence had all of that. We're going to start with 2. We're at 2 now. Hopefully we can increase it to 5. The time bound is in the second quarter. Well, are we in the first quarter?
Mhm.
Are we in the third quarter? Like, how many more months is that? But giving yourself a realistic, specific amount of time to achieve that goal or that improvement, with attaching a key performance indicator to a very common, easily definable business objective that volunteers can support and can build capacity for. So that's kind of the simplest example.
Mhm.
We get a lot more wonky and deep dive in that webinar, which is KPIs Made Simple. Again, I work with Visas Voices and create stuff for them. You don't have to use their volunteer software to do this. It's helpful because that software happens to have all of the things that you need to measure these things.
Mhm.
But pretty much any kind of software that's more sophisticated than using Google Suite of calendar and spreadsheets, even
Mhm.
that can be manipulated to a point to measure these things. If you have someone on staff in IT who wants to do that, or you get a very specifically skilled volunteer to help set that up with a project, all of this is very easily doable. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. Even if, like me, numbers were maybe not your greatest strength in numbers and math growing up or in school, but you can find somebody to do it, and you can help direct what is the business objective, define that, and then attach just a few 2 to 4 key performance indicators to each volunteer role, so that that can be evaluated in a similar way, not as high pressure as paid staff, but you can keep coming back to that and proving your case, again, to leadership, to funders, to the board, whoever you need to, internally, out to the community, that our volunteers and volunteer services are very clearly effective in helping us achieve business objectives, financial objectives, the goals and mission of the agency. All of that is very provable with data for the kinds of people and audiences that want to see that data, versus the kinds of people and audiences who just want to hear a heartwarming story about, the puppy that was saved from the flood by the volunteer firefighters or
Mhm.
whatever. But you want both of those things. You want a narrative and an analytical, data driven thing. And ideally, those are combined to get you the information that can be used to educate anybody else in the agency who might be just ignorant of the impact that volunteers are having, or they just don't understand it. I think a lot of, especially starting out as a volunteer coordinator, I knew my department head understood what I did,
Mhm.
but I learned from her, Artrice Williams, fantastic person. I think she's running a food bank in the East Bay across the bay from me right now. But she really kind of helped model leadership for me that showed how to educate up, how to manage up, how to
Mhm.
communicate the positives. This is, 20 something years ago, before
Mhm.
we were such a data driven, data mining society and economy.
Mhm.
So she was really ahead of her times. I have to give her props for that, for helping me, early in my career understand the importance of that, even if I wasn't particularly interested in putting a spreadsheet together, because that was one of my least favorite things to do. I started to understand the value of that. And then working with volunteer software at the time, it was what was going to become Volgistics and things that, many softwares have been around for decades and some are newer. But almost any volunteer software is going to be able to help you not just collect that guardrail basic data that kind of frames what you're talking about, but you really want to dig into what are those business objectives, goals, milestones, to turn into key performance indicators for each volunteer role that genuinely supports the agency.
That's great. So, so help us understand, or for the volunteers, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
thinking about that 2 to 5. So you develop the, okay, we're going to move from 2 to 5
5 per shift, yeah,
per
or
shift.
patient visits, yeah.
Who do you think, in order to achieve that, what do you think, and who is it, the volunteers like should be aware of these KPIs, and then also who should be monitoring and measuring and um, making sure those, like, what are the roles in there and what is everyone doing in order to achieve these?
Well, hopefully you tell the volunteers what's expected of them. Hopefully,
There we go. Yes.
hopefully they're in the loop that something
Yes.
new is expected of them, and that they're
Yes.
getting the support or the training, or some other timing is changed in their duties on that shift, that they have time to increase from 2 visits to 5 visits.
Hmm.
So that's part of the making it's a smart goal. Is, it's measurable, it's attainable, it's relevant. And then a smarter goal is that you evaluate and you keep reevaluating that in a cycle, whether that's whatever you want to set up, whether that's a 3 month cycle, a 6 month cycle, a year long cycle. A
Hmm.
lot of us in salaried jobs over the years, I know this is true whether I worked for nonprofits or government agencies, about once a year we get a performance review or evaluation in that job. It doesn't have to be that intense or necessarily stressful for volunteers, hopefully not, but that there is a very fair and equitable and accessible form of evaluation based on this information. So ideally, a lot of people know this is happening, because that helps awareness of volunteer impact in the agency. But at the very least, the volunteer coordinator, the volunteers themselves, announcing it to leadership, aligning it with HR or
Hmm.
operations or finance. So ideally, this is a pretty wide conversation, but the people doing the day to day are, in this example of hospital or healthcare, the volunteer coordinator or volunteer services team, they're all in on the goal, where they're all committed to helping make it happen. And part of that smarter evaluation and reevaluation
Hmm.
is taking feedback from clients, in this case patients,
Hmm.
the volunteers themselves, maybe, and in developing, and ideally in developing the business objective and the KPIs, there are conversations with the volunteers already doing the work, because, hey, whether we're paid or unpaid, nobody wants a manager to come to them and dump a bunch of new stuff on their desk to do. It's like we want to have a conversation about what's our bandwidth and capacity. So ideally, these KPIs, key performance indicators, are directly related to feedback from volunteers, feedback from patients, other data from volunteer services or patient experience, social determinants of health, that say, we will see a real benefit if we increase from 2 to 5 visits per shift. We
Hmm.
think it's attainable. The volunteers think it's attainable if we make these slight changes in the rest of their schedule, and maybe we take away something that felt like less meaningful busy work, and we reprioritize their time. So ideally it comes out of a conversation with everybody involved and doesn't feel like just, someone put a pile of new files of
Mhm.
work on your desk and you have no idea what or why. So communicating that early and often and all throughout the process is really part of the making the case with data, is having that communication plan in place so that none of this is a surprise to anybody, or if it's a surprise, it's very high up the food chain, and maybe they had a conversation about it in an all hands meeting 6 months ago. But now at the end of the calendar year, they're like, wow, these numbers from patient experience are so much better than they were 6 months ago. Tell me how that happened. That's the kind of positive, happy surprise you want to give to somebody in leadership making those budget decisions for the next year about where resources going to go. And hopefully feeding this kind of information up to management also helps them understand the very, very way too common misconception that volunteers are free. They don't cost us any money. They're just free people that we pull out of the freezer and we thaw them out, we shake them up a little bit, and they don't need any training, and we just plop them in.
Mhm.
Nothing's further from the truth than that, but that's still too common of an assumption, especially if people are in roles like operations or IT where they just don't deal with volunteers day to day and they have no idea what's happening, especially something that's very complex or highly regulated like a hospital where there are so many departments and there's so much going on all the
Mhm.
time that why would the general manager or the executive director or the CEO have any understanding of what volunteers are doing day to day unless they were promoted from being the director of volunteers? It's extremely unlikely that board or upper leadership has any idea what's going on day to day, especially in a really large, complex organization. So this is a way to show and tell, to show your work, and
Mhm.
to demonstrate the value of when we invest in having proper staff to run volunteer departments or to design the programs, or experts with a little bit of alphabet soup after their names who know what they're doing, or even
Mhm.
if they don't have the alphabet soup, they've been doing it for 5, 10, 20 years. They know what they're doing. They're experts in it in some other way with some other path. Recognizing the value of the staff people running volunteer services and the volunteers themselves is crucial these days to success. And I wanted to tie this into research that was done a couple years ago
Mhm.
by the Initiative for Strategic Volunteer Engagement, which I've talked about before when I've been on your show, Lasheena, which proved that when this was in the height of COVID anxieties when the study was done. We're still unfortunately continuing with multiple problems and pandemics and complications, but it's important that this data still stands up the test of time a few years later. When funders specifically are shown information and data that proves volunteer impact, they are very happy to give money specifically for volunteer services. So I've worked with a lot of nonprofits as clients where the initial reaction when I come on board working with them might be from development or even the executive director. Well, we just need general funds. We want general funds. We want to avoid earmarks for volunteer services, but we just need general funds. Well, if you're measuring key performance indicators or other metrics that matter beyond just number of people and hours, because that's boring, but if you can really show the impact of volunteers on the mission to a foundation, to in a grant, to a funder, that's what gets you the money versus somebody else who just churns out, we have this many people in this many hours,
Mhm.
because you've really made the case. And what we found with interviews with funders, with focus groups, with thousands of people responding to a survey in nonprofits, both leaders like executive directors and general managers, directors of development, and day-to-day volunteer coordinators, managers, and that middle or lower management. What we found was that most organizations aren't collecting this relevant data at all, and they really, really should be. And it doesn't have to take that much more time to do it, especially if you have some software. You can make some adjustments. You can call tech support for the software company that you have for volunteer or donor management and say, I want to set this up. How do I set this up? It's probably a 30-minute call to do that. Hopefully you've got that tech support. Or again, something I've done over the years. I had a volunteer at the San Francisco Zoo who was a Salesforce expert. Again, I'm in San Francisco. Salesforce is here. We got the free license for their database. This is 10 more than 10 years ago, and he set it up for us. He's an expert. He stayed in touch. We got that all set. So again, you don't have to be the expert. You don't have to pile it all on IT or some other department. You can probably find team members who are interested in making this happen, whether those are volunteer or paid staff, who can contribute just a little bit of their time and expertise to upfront to launch it. But then once it's underway, it doesn't take that much effort to evaluate and reevaluate and monitor and report out, because you're probably writing quarterly or annual reports anyway. You might as well add something really, really useful and interesting to that data and that information that's going to help volunteer services not just survive or hang on in tough times, but really thrive. And that helps the entire organization be successful, even in immensely challenging times that we're in right now.
Wow. I love how you took data and volunteerism to the next level beyond just how many hours, how many volunteers, and really showing and being able to demonstrate the impact that it's making to the greater mission of the organization, which ultimately helps justify having a volunteer program within the organization in order to expand its mission overall. So I love the way that you explain that, and really helping, especially organizations. I'm thinking about a lot of the organizations that's starting out, or they might be a mid-sized organization, don't necessarily have a dedicated person for volunteers, kind of like someone who seems like they can manage the volunteers. Hey, you're the volunteer coordinator. But now being able to use the data, and you talked about some resources to be able to bring a volunteer program and have funders openly want to support what you're doing because you're able to justify why the volunteer program is important. So I love that you touched on those things, and I think and how data can support in those conversations, because working at different organizations, I've seen it where pretty much it's like, hey, you're the volunteer, you're the volunteer.
Yeah, guess what? You have this hat now. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And we can't send you for training. So but here's a book or something like that, figure it out kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where you really, and that's what I love from the last show as well. You talked about, like, this is how you can get these positions funded, or in order to be able to support volunteers, and building your volunteer program. So and talking about the data, I think just helps kind of um continue to, like, close out that conversation as to, okay, now we got the data to support it, and then here's some ways that you can get funding to be able to support. So if you haven't seen that video, our last sessions,
Go watch that too.
go watch that as well. So that way you can kind of connect everything, especially if you're starting out and building your volunteer program, and or trying to take it to the next level and trying to figure out how to fund it. Because of course, and I'm sure Dana, you have data to kind of support this part. I mean,
Yep.
that it's more cost effective to kind of build out that volunteer program than sometimes even bringing in a whole staff team for things that you might not necessarily need an entire position for. So yes.
Yeah, and there's a pretty great calculator that's been out for years by Sterling Volunteers, which we think of as people doing background checks and kind of
Hmm.
around insurance and safety and risk management and stuff. And I know Katie, who founded that company, is a great
Hmm.
organization. But they have a really easy, and I have my YouTube channel, Priceless Advice and Tuesday
Hmm.
Tips, and I've done a Tuesday Tips video about it. People can easily find me on YouTube and look up, ROI of volunteers calculator and find that video. But you just plug in some basic numbers, and using that calculator and some other data and information over the years, I've, for clients, done that calculation. And for the example of the Los Angeles Zoo that I worked with a couple of years ago, for every dollar that they invested in volunteer services, between membership, donations, advertising, word of mouth, program attendance by the public, press releases, that added up to $9 of return on investment.
Wow.
Almost nowhere else in the world that isn't a Ponzi scheme is going to promise a
Yes.
900% return on
Hmm.
investment. So that's better odds than you're going to get in Vegas, on Wall Street, buying your lotto ticket at the corner bodega in my neighborhood. Like, that's better odds than
Hmm.
you're going to get anywhere else. It just takes expertise, strategic investment. All of the tools to do it are there. If people want to get in touch with me or go to my website, I have a lot of, these tools and information linked there to things I've worked on with Initiative for Strategic Volunteer Engagement. And this also has been supported by fairly recent 2024 AmeriCorps research that they did in 2021 through 2023. So again, height of pandemic
Hmm.
impact. We're still feeling the impacts, of course, they're not going away, but that was kind of the height of, like, what do we do? What's happening? And a lot of panicked, bad short-term decisions by organizations. But that AmeriCorps research found that in certain kind of metropolitan urban areas, volunteering went up by between 2021 and 2023. And other urban areas, including Washington, D.C., it went drastically down.
Hmm.
Well, what was the reason for that? Part of the reason for that was probably that administrations were changing, people were changing jobs in certain metro areas that are more tied to government work, things like that.
Hmm.
But also, there was a lot of movement to different parts of the country and different cities because of moving back to support family, kind of people coming more together into community.
Hmm.
And the result of that was that overall volunteering trended up through 2024 through the data that we had.
Hmm.
That's counter to most of the narrative and a lot of the anecdotal things you hear where, again, I hear more from organizations that are panicked because they're reaching out to me for help. But
Yeah.
you hear like, oh, volunteering's down. I can't recruit. Everyone's burned out.
Hmm.
Boomers don't want to do this anymore. Gen Z doesn't want to do this anymore. Well, maybe it's time for just, let's be honest with ourselves, evaluation of several things within the volunteer program. Is it welcoming people? Do they feel safe? Do they feel like they belong? Is there even an easy way on the organization's website to find out about volunteering? I think I've spoken before. Craig Young and Inspiring Service have done incredible research about most nonprofits have really bad websites. So it's hard to figure out how to support them if they have very bad old website design or links that don't work, or it takes, 17 clicks to find out how to volunteer. Most people are going to give up after 2 or 3 clicks of a journey. So there are some small things that you can invest in a big way, like a big strategic way, like a website overhaul. That's a big
Hmm.
investment. But you can also just do really small changes that make a big difference to make people feel welcome, like get back to somebody within 24 hours of them contacting you about volunteering. Don't have it take 2 weeks, or don't have it completely fall off your plate because you're so over busy with stuff and you don't know how to prioritize things, or your bosses keep piling those files on your desk and they don't know how to prioritize your time. Have some boundaries, draw a line, and then you can build up with these basic ideas, key performance indicators, looking at, sharing with them the research from Initiative for Strategic Volunteer Engagement, AmeriCorps, showing that, hey, other major institutions have done this research. They've proven that if we do these things, this will help us succeed more as an organization. Any leader should be swayed by that sentence. Any good leader should want this organization to succeed without drastically cutting staff, without complying in advance with, illegal or unconstitutional funding cuts while they're tied up in court. And like, well, we better throw a bunch of people in our DEI programs under the bus in order to look like we're complying with this and get this money. None of that ever works in the long run. All that does is break trust with your volunteers, with your community. If we see nonprofits, trying to comply in advance, or doing any of these other things where they think, oh, if I exclude or start to hurt this particular group of people I work with, everything will be better. Hurting someone else never makes your life better. It just doesn't.
Right.
That's there's a lot of people who try to convince you that that's true for their own reasons. That's never true. That never actually bears out in reality. So if at least if you can, if you feel like you're a department of one, so I'm going to talk to the one volunteer coordinator who's completely overwhelmed, to the person who's just started their nonprofit, in the last few years, and they're really struggling. If you kind of stop and do this pre-production, and we're in media production, we understand, but when you invest in kind of the pre-production and the setup and you get that right, or if you've just been scrambling and you just say time out, we're going to do a program evaluation, we're going to do a reset, we're going to set up our software, or we're going to acquire software with a free Salesforce license or buy it or something else. There's also very low cost or free volunteer management softwares that are more simpler, but you can kind of tweak them to work in KPIs and these things. Whatever you can set up to assist you and automate stuff that is not AI, but is just normal software, that's going to help you make that case sooner than later. The longer you keep kind of scrambling and being overwhelmed and not saying, hey, everybody, we just need to take a couple of weeks or a couple of months. We need to slow some stuff down. Maybe we need to communicate that we're having maybe even a pause in programs, or the programs continue, but communicate early and often.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to do a reval. We're going to use these academic measures that are proven, like volunteer satisfaction index that my colleague Rosanna Galindo came up with years ago. That's for volunteer surveys. It's exactly what it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
There are tools already out there. Nobody has to reinvent anything. I'll gladly guide you to the tools you need to do this. If you want me to help you out as well, I'm happy to do that. But this is something that any volunteer coordinator in any organization in any part of the sector can figure out how to do yourself. If you're smart and capable and talented enough to already be running volunteer programs, you can absolutely teach yourself and learn just some basics, and using these equations and these calculators that are already available online, and say, aha, if we do this, 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 and this, that proves that volunteers are tied directly into our animal adoption rate, our child literacy rate, our crisis warm line participation rate, whatever it is, the business objective. Volunteers are an important part of that, and you don't have to be overwhelmed. You can figure out how to do it, and I'm happy to point you towards the tools and guide you through that, or just you can self-learn on your own, but it doesn't have to be that hard or complicated. It doesn't have to have that much of a budget impact. It's great if you can get more investment to hire another staff person if you feel like you're working 80 hours a week. This can justify getting another full-time or part-time person on your team. There's a lot of ways that the information that you already have available is there when you are really measuring the metrics that matter, and making sure that you're not just, you can't measure everything, right? You have to prioritize something at some point. So if you start with the guardrails of this many people, this many hours, filling this many shifts, we have this much of a gap we want to get to, that's your guardrail. And then everything else within that, hopefully you can attach to the mission, the business objective, at least a couple of business objectives of the organization that you work with. And the other thing I've seen watching this happen with clients and other volunteer coordinators, people I mentor through our professional association Alive have gone through this, is that when leadership, even your exact supervisor or direct report, but when leadership sees that someone in volunteer services is doing something like this,
Mm-hmm.
and they're interested in data-driven results, and leadership starts to learn that all of these resources and tables and calculations already exist, it's just a matter of understanding it and plugging it in, which isn't that hard to do, then they think, oh, that isn't just someone I randomly tapped on the head 5 years ago. Now they're good at it. Now they know what they're doing. Maybe they're going after their CVA or their CNP, or they're getting, a graduate degree in something part-time, or they already have it. Then leadership starts to notice, oh, you're invested in your professional development. You're invested in the success of the organization. And hopefully a good leader says, I'm investing back in you.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we want to have, is that full conversation as a result of having, these metrics that matter, really measuring things that are important to the agency, and not just maybe personally important to an individual volunteer or volunteer coordinator. It's like, great, I want to measure the number of puppies I petted today. Well, that's great for you.
Mm-hmm.
That may or may not relate to a business objective or a strategic pillar of the strategic plan that the agency is going through. But, good on you for celebrate that as much as you want. But we want to have metrics that matter and prioritize what we're measuring, because we also know the old adage that what isn't counted doesn't count.
Mm-hmm.
If data is not there to begin with, then do your best to create a starting point, even if you're some years into the role, even if you're trying to run the program at the same time you're doing this. At least take enough of a pause, reprioritize your time, talk to your supervisors about it, have them understand why you need to reprioritize your time to do more of this strategic level thinking, instead of being stuck in that kind of panicked response reactive mode that is all too common for any of us
Mm-hmm.
working in nonprofits, where it's like
Mm-hmm.
side quest, this thing, that
Yes.
thing has my attention. Like,
Yep.
okay, let me just, on Wednesday mornings from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. is me just working quietly. No one interrupts me. No one schedules any meetings. Like, whatever you have to do, whether it's 1 hour a week or 3 hours a week, whatever amount can work for you, block out a chunk of time that's devoted to setting up metrics that matter, something like key performance indicators. It can be other things too. It doesn't have to go directly into KPIs, but that's something that every executive understands and can
Mm-hmm.
relate to. That's the kind of data HR and other operations and
Mm-hmm.
executive directors are usually looking for,
Mm-hmm.
and funders are often looking for. So, it doesn't have to be overwhelming. It's not that complicated. We can get, if you look up my website, there's resources to these past webinars. If you just look up Visas Voices, Visas One, KPIs Made Simple, that was just done a couple of weeks ago, you can get that recording as well. But the resources exist. It's just a matter of valuing yourself, valuing volunteer services, understanding that it takes a little bit of upfront investment of time and or money to make it happen,
Mm-hmm.
mostly your time, and just dedicating yourself to getting through just one piece, one step at a time to set it up, and then it's set up forever, and you just kind of keep track of it.
Love it, love it. So, how can those tuning in stay in touch and follow you?
I'm very easy to stalk online,
Okay.
probably a little too easy. So danalitwin.com or danalitwinconsulting.com. Email me, dana@danalitwin.com. That's an Litwin, like it says in my little nameplate there. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm more on Blue Sky than on Twitter or Facebook these days. I'm more on LinkedIn and Blue Sky. But you can reach out to me if they have specific questions about what we talked about. And again, you can just look up the Initiative for Strategic Volunteer Engagement, which is now housed with Independent Sector. You can find that study and that information. You can look up AmeriCorps' 2024 research report. They put out research every couple of years. This is what came out in 2024. And so these are all publicly available resources. None of this is behind a paywall. None of this is proprietary, where only I can give you access to it. My whole deal, especially with my YouTube channel, Dana's Priceless Advice and Tuesday Tips, you can go subscribe to that, is trying to get as much free, easy to find information as possible to help any leader or volunteer's job and day and career go better and be easier. It's there. I'm not interested in putting anything behind a subscription
Mm-hmm.
paywall where only some people can get access to it. That's just not how I work, and I'm able to work that way, and I want to continue to be able to give as much free information as possible to folks. And then if they happen to want to hire me for a webinar or to do a program evaluation or design some strategic volunteer engagement tactics and things like
Mm-hmm.
that, of course, yeah, that's my bread and butter of my business. I keep pretty busy with that. But it's really about things like these shows today with you, Lasheena, and thank you for having this show and doing this work yourself, because I know how much hard work it is to put media together. That it's important to just get this information out, because I found that more often than not, someone is just they feel isolated, they're siloed as a
Mm-hmm.
early career, even mid-career volunteer coordinator. They may not even know that our professional network exists. Alive, go to volunteeralive.org.
Mm-hmm.
Tons of resources there for members and non-members. Absolutely worth a $50 membership every year to be a part of that and get those resources and all those extra benefits. But there is a whole community that can support leaders of volunteers. There's a lot of ways to do that. National organizations, local associations, reaching out to colleagues one-on-one like this. And that's how I've made a lot of my professional connections, is just saying, hey, I like your work. Let's start a conversation on LinkedIn. Hey, I like what you're doing. That's really cool. You want to be on my show? Hey, Lasheena, oh, you found me. I want to, great. I love being on your show. This is what it's all about, is supporting each other in community and just getting the information out there, because, hey, anything you can do to make our day-to-day lives easier right now, that's a plus.
Mhm. Yep. Thank you. And thank you for all that you do and your willingness to share the information, not behind a paid wall, but just so that many can help. And through helping many of volunteer coordinators and others, you're reaching a lot more people that you might not even can imagine. So thank you for that. Definitely appreciate that, and appreciate you coming back on Nonprofit Enthusiast Live. And hopefully you'll join us on again later in the year. I always enjoy these conversations, and I just love I didn't even think about, because this month being measurement and evaluation, I just love how you connected the two within the volunteer world and the volunteer program. So I love that, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me back, Lashana, and we'll have more sometime later.
Yes,
Thanks, everyone.
absolutely. All right, everyone, we'll see you next time on Nonprofit Enthusiast Live. Bye.